about to lose your car, control of your car, you don't let go, you tighten up. So usually grip pressure is really a symptom of loss of control. Does that make sense? All right, so we'll work through your grip. The other thing that gets the shaft in alignment with the forearms is inward rotation of your elbows. I have a phrase that's written in there that I'll go through: rotate, tuck, and tilt. You'll be hearing a lot about that later. But rotating your elbows inward, what that basically does, if I rotated my elbows outward, I would create an angle, right, between my forearms and shaft. If I rotate my elbows inward, right, you can see my elbows come in, my wrists go up, and all of a sudden now I create a straight line, right? So through the palms, an inward rotation is how we're going to get the forearms and shaft to line up in a single plane, which will give you more stability and lets you relax and give you more feel for your putter after the motion. Make sense? Okay, so that's our first big point. Now our second point is this. I want you to look at where Tiger's eyes are in relation to the golf ball. He sets his eyes over the inside edge or over the golf ball. Okay, now that to me is a preference. I like that because it kind of makes sense to me. You know, if I was shooting a rifle, where would my eyes be? Rifle sight, right? I wouldn't look to the side of a rifle. If I was throwing darts, my eyes would be right on the target line. If I was playing pool, my eyes would be on the pool cue. Precise alignment games, if your eyes, your optic line and your target line match up, it's simply easier to see it. Right? So the way I look at putting is that the most optimal position for a player to set their eyes would be to get them over the golf ball. Now the key is, how do you do that? Because that's just as important as doing it. Right? I'll use Ben Crane as an example. If you looked at Ben maybe 3 years ago, he was really struggling with herniated, I think it was L4 or L5, right? And he used to stand up a lot taller to the golf ball, and that's how he had to play, because if he got into a deep forward tilt, he's having trouble with his back. But when he putted, he also had to stand tall to the golf ball to practice for any length of time. Well, in that situation, and I heard him say this, he goes, I putt best when my eyes are 2 inches inside of the golf ball. That would be a true statement if a player couldn't tilt forward. He would putt better with his eyes inside of the golf ball because it's a forward tilt that gets the eyes over the golf ball. So what I always look at is, you know, what's the posture that the player can, you know, optimally, the more someone can tilt forward from the hips, the better, right? Because then they can play golf underneath their body, right? But if someone can't do that, then you have to work around it, right? Does anybody here have back issues so that we know when we get out there? Just a little bit? Okay. Yeah. We'll talk about that too. A lot of times just the way someone sets their hips in relation to their core can really, especially in putting, can really affect the lower back. And we'll talk about that when we get out there. But anyway, what I'm getting at is this. You know, optimally I'd like to see someone tilt from the hips, which would allow their eyes to drop over the golf ball. If someone couldn't tilt from the hips, I would want their eyes to be inside of the golf ball. Right? Now, if they're over it, I have an optic line and a target line. My optic line is drawn from my eyes down to the ground. The target line is drawn bisecting through the ball. If those two match up, I just think you got a much better chance of seeing where square is. The more I'm looking at it like this, it's a skewed angle, right? It'd be like trying to shoot a rifle like this. The further I got in here, the harder it is to see that straight line, right? Because there's an angle to it, right? If I'm right on it, I can see where straight is. Optimal to me is inside edge of the golf ball. Acceptable is a little inside of that point, and unacceptable is past it, right? And there, you know, I don't think you'd ever shoot a gun like this. You know, got a good chance here, optimal, pretty good chance here. I don't think I've never seen a good putter set his eyes past the golf ball. Right? Does that make sense? Okay, so that's eyes in relation to the ball. The other thing I would say about the eyes, it's really sometimes overlooked, because you know, as teachers, and I make this mistake, you know, I get so conscious of the player and the putter that I don't look at their head. Well, a big mistake a lot of people make is their eyes aren't square. So you see a player kind of have his head cocked in one direction or the other. Well, they're going to see a skewed line. Well, straight will never look straight to them, right? Straight to the target. So we want to make sure your eyes, and you understand where your eyes should be, that they should be parallel to the target line, right? So those are the things we're going to look at. The next point that's important is where your hands are in relation to your shoulders. Now, that kind of comes back to the forward tilt of the posture. What we like to see is the hands to come to rest under the shoulders. Now the reason for that is because if my hands come to rest under my shoulders, then they can swing back and forth in basically a straight line. If my hands were outside of my shoulder line, what would happen? If I just let them swing, they'd swing around because they're always going to want to go back to my shoulder line. If they were in, they'd swing out. And a lot of times when you look at a player and you see a path problem, guy's got it going outside, maybe he's coming inside too quickly, a lot of times it relates to where their hands are in relation to their shoulders. That could be one reason for it. So if you get someone tilted properly from the hip joint, and you get their hands to come to rest directly under their shoulders, you're really not going to have path issues as far as their hands in relation to their shoulders. It's a way, especially if the palms match up. What you'll find as we go through this is the better we get your setup, the less thinking you have to do when the putter's swinging. That's why I spend so much time on all these little key points of the setup, because when Jason and I look at you, we could do it differently. We could say, well, you're swinging inside and you got to hook it, or you're swinging outside, you got to cut it. We can make you very conscious of what the putter does, right? But the problem with that is good players don't think that way when they putt well under pressure. They're not thinking about the putter head or the mechanics of the stroke. They're in a pre-shot routine that gets them into a right setup so that they can trust the putter head, right? And at most, they're thinking about the rhythm, a lot of work on the rhythm and the timing and the tempo of a good player's putting stroke. Not so much on path. Path is really created by the setup. That's why I'm going to go through all these things in greater detail. All right, so we want the hands under the shoulders. We want the shoulders to be square to the line. That starts with the palms. If the palms are square to each other, matching, the forearms are, well, now my shoulders should be parallel to the line. Sometimes people walk into a putt because we're human beings, we're built to walk straight ahead and aim straight ahead. We're built to go this way. So ask someone to turn to the side, or have the target to the side of them, they'll naturally probably open up to it to see it better, right? It's just a human instinct. So, even when I walk into a putt, I'll have my start line, which we'll talk about when we do some green reading stuff. I'll have my start line, I'll set the putter down, and I am open, that purposely open, because I feel like I can see that line better. I'm over it, I can see it better. But the key is, you've got to make sure that when you address the golf ball with your body, you get squared up. And by squared up, I mean your shoulders. There's tour players that have their feet open. There's tour players that have their feet closed. But the common denominator is your shoulders are square, because your shoulders are responsible for the path that your hands are going to swing in. So I could have my hands under my shoulders, but my shoulders open. I'm going to cut across this golf ball, right? Which means I'm going to have to make some sort of compensation to make the putt at that point. All right, so we want your shoulders square at address and at impact. All right, so sometimes you see players start out pretty good, but the moment they hit the golf ball, that right shoulder's come around too much. So what I'll do a lot of times is I'll look at someone and I'll focus on their shoulders and I listen for their click. So right at impact, when I hear a click, I want to see are their shoulders square. Because if I'm standing like where you guys are, I'll go to that side, right? And if I can see their right shoulder, when I hear that click, they're open, right? So we want your shoulders square at address and at impact, okay? All right, next point that's important about the hands is the distance your hands are from the ground. This is a really vital point. Your hands should be at a distance from the ground where basically there's some connection of your elbows to your rib cage. All right, so let's put this rotate tuck into play right now. So go ahead and stand up for me. All right, so when your hands just hang from the side, right, naturally, the palms don't face each other. For most people, they don't. It's usually about a 45-degree angle, right? So if I swing my arms up, I have to rotate my elbows in. So I want you guys to do this, just until your palms match. If you rotate your elbows too far, your palms are going to face the sky, right? So just get it to neutral out, match, okay? So that's rotate. Rotate your elbows into your palms match, okay? Now, the next word is tuck. Tuck is, we want to pull your elbows in until your elbows sit in front of your, touching, connected, but in front of your rib cage. So a lot of people go too far here. They get their elbows trapped behind them, okay? I want your elbows to be in front of you, and I'll explain why later. So, like, this would be pretty good. This would be in front. This would be trapped, right? We're stuck back behind. So he's connected, but he's not stuck, right? A little disconnected. Right there is the spot, right? So that's pretty good right there. That's pretty. A little more in. Kind of resting. Good. This is great. That's good. That's good. Okay. So that's rotate, tuck. What was the the last word? You guys remember?
Tilt.
Where do you tilt from? Always the hip joint. All right, so rotate. Now watch how I do this. Rotate, tuck, and I tilt from the hips, and then I let my hands kind of swing, keep my elbow connection back under my shoulders. So at this point, I'm tilted enough where I can get working under my body. All right? That's a little too much. There, right there. You lost your touch. That's very good. This is super. Great. Great. So it's kind of cool because rotate, tuck, and tilt, after I explain it, takes about 10 seconds to teach a guy, right? And you take a brand new golfer, you can get them to do that and like that, right? Okay, so go ahead and sit back down. All right, now, the next point that's important is your balance point. I'm going to pull up Tiger here, hitting a golf shot or getting ready to hit a golf shot, and a putt. What do you see different there?
More knee bend when he's getting a hip shot, it looks like.
He does. Look how much, his spine angle, by the way, I'm not going to take the time to write it, but his spine angle is 50 degrees in both of these. His head's more down, right, because his eyes are vertically set over the golf ball, so his head's more down, and that's fine. You're not making a pivot in putting. He talks about keeping his chin up to make a full shoulder turn in his golf swing. Okay, so that was different. The spine angle is the same. Biggest difference I see is that his hips are further back, which is why his knees are further forward. All right, well, what's the reason for that? The reason for that is your lower body, the golf swing, is your foundation. So when he swings a golf club, right, he's turning his top against his base, right? His top and his bottom don't turn together, right? He turns his top against his base. So his lower body has to be athletically set and flexed so it can support his upper body as it rotates back. So therefore, his hips go back, his knees come forward, now he's set. Now he can really go. All right, now, the reason for the lower body is turn. The reason for the turn and coil is power. Remember, in putting, we don't want power over control. Okay? So we don't want that type of weight movement or rotation or unloading. We want really stability. Think of a putting stroke is a pendulum. It's a free moving object, right, underneath a stable fulcrum, right? And you start moving around, you change the top of the fulcrum. It'll never be consistent. All right, so when you look at a putt, what you're seeing here, this frankly is one of the things I think has changed with him. What you see here is that he's much more on the balls of his feet. His hips are higher, which pitches his shoulders more forward. Because you see, if the hips go back, so do the shoulders. In the golf swing, that's fine because I'm rotating in both directions, which is clearing a path for my arms to swing to the target. But in putting, you want minimal movement. And so when you see a player, and you see this a lot, they'll get in here and they'll crowd it. Well, now they're in a position where they have to move because they don't have the freedom to not move. So one of the things that I think is really crucial is to get someone to the point where their weight is much more biased to the balls of their feet, less knee flex, hips are higher and more forward. That brings the shoulders forward. What's that do? It allows me to make a putting motion where my top is not moving, right? Because if your top is moving, you're never going to be consistent at the bottom of your stroke. That pendulum, the whole reason the pendulum, the way that the pendulum can come back to the bottom the same way every time, is because the top is a fixed point. If you're moving the top around, then the bottom can never come back to the same place. Right? It's going to be inconsistent. Does that make sense to you guys?